Friends, this is a story from a very old time. In a big city, there lived a merchant whose name was Zaid. Zaid was not just a merchant, but he was considered the richest man of his time. His warehouses were filled with silk, precious spices, and diamonds. But this extreme wealth had created a disease in his heart, which we call arrogance. He looked down on the poor and believed that everything he had was only the result of his own hard work and intelligence, and he considered himself dependent on no one. Once, Zaid decided that he would take his largest trade caravan to a distant land. He prepared hundreds of camels and loaded them with valuable goods. His old accountant advised him, "Son Zaid, this tariq is very difficult, and these days it is the season of sandstorms in the desert. It is better that we wait for a few days before leaving." But Zaid replied with his usual indifference, "Accountant, I have the best horses, experienced guards, and the finest equipment in the world. I am not afraid of any storm."
The journey began. For many days, the caravan moved in a calm manner. One afternoon, when the sun was blazing, suddenly a dark wall appeared on the horizon. It was not a cloud, but a terrifying sandstorm. Within moments, darkness spread everywhere. Walls of sand rose toward the sky. Zaid, who was riding his fast horse, became separated from his caravan. In panic, he called out to his companions and shouted for his guards, but his voice was lost in the noise of the storm. After many hours, when the storm stopped, the scene had completely changed. There were high sand dunes everywhere, and far and wide, there was no human and no animal. Zaid was completely alone. His valuable horse had also disappeared. Now he had neither a water bag nor any large supply of food. When he searched his clothes while breathing heavily, he found a small pouch tied to his waist, in which there were only 3 dates.
Zaid, who until yesterday had the power to serve grand feasts to thousands of people, had now become dependent on only 3 dates. The burning sand and the intensity of thirst made him fall to the ground. He looked toward the sky, and for the first time, he felt his helplessness. Now, in this scorching desert, what will happen to Zaid? Will these 3 dates give him life, or will this be his final journey due to the intensity of thirst? Zaid's lips had become dry and cracked, and the heat of the sun was melting his mind. The merchant who until yesterday slept on silk beds was now fighting a battle between life and death on hot sand dunes, on warm sand dunes. Far and wide, there was a sea of sand that did not seem to end. Zaid opened his small pouch with trembling hands and looked at the 3 dates inside. At this moment, these 3 dates seemed more valuable to him than all the diamonds in the world. His heart wanted to eat all 3 dates at once, but the merchant inside him stopped him. "Zaid, if you eat all of them now, then after a few hours when thirst and hunger begin to take your life, what will you do?"
After great struggle, he took out only 1 date. As soon as he placed the first date in his mouth, he felt as if blood had started flowing again in his dying veins. This 1 date gave him enough strength to stand again. He kept walking and walking until the shadows of evening began to grow. On the way, he saw an old chest buried in the sand. Zaid thought maybe it contained water or food. He used all his strength to clear the sand and opened the chest. His eyes were left wide open. It was filled with valuable gold coins and jewelry. At some time in the past, it must have belonged to another unfortunate caravan. Until yesterday, Zaid worked day and night for this gold. Today, he looked at it with contempt and cried out, "Oh, coins of gold, If only you could become a sip of water. If only you could become a piece of bread. He understood that the value of one date given by Allah was greater than this entire chest.
The sun had set, and the cold of the desert had begun when Zaid saw a shadow coming toward him from a distance. His hope rose that perhaps a caravan was approaching. But as the shadow came closer, he saw that it was an old, weak, and extremely frail traveler whose clothes were torn and who was dragging himself on the sand. The old man came near Zaid and fell down, and in a faint voice said, "Water, or a bite, for the sake of Allah. I have been hungry for many days." Zaid now had only 2 dates left. In his mind, a battle began. On one side was his own life, and on the other side was the dying old man. He thought, if I give him 1 date, then only 1 will remain for me. And how will I get out of this desert? Will Zaid change his old behavior, or ignore this old man to save his own life? Will he give the second date to someone else and walk toward his own death?
The silence of the night had wrapped the desert in its grip. On one side, the old traveler was taking his last breaths, and on the other side, Zaid stood, holding the last 2 dates of his life. This was the moment where the greatest battle between ego and humanity takes place. Zaid looked at the old man's dried face and fading eyes. Suddenly, he remembered the time when he used to sit in his grand palace and push away the poor. He realized that perhaps Allah had brought him to this desert so that he could understand the pain of others. Zaid took a deep breath, put his fear aside, and placed the second date into the old man's mouth. The old man, whose breaths were fading, slowly began to open his eyes. As the bite of the date went down his throat, he held Zaid's hand with trembling hands and said only this, "Young man, Allah never leaves anyone's debt unpaid. What you have sown today, you will surely reap tomorrow." Now Zaid had only 1 date left. The night passed, and the next morning, when the sun rose, the heat was even stronger. Zaid had become so weak that it was impossible for him to take even a single step. He thought that now the time had come to eat his last date, so that he might be able to walk a little further. But as soon as he took that last date out of the pouch, he heard the sound of someone crying from behind a sand dune. He dragged himself there and saw that a small deer was struggling in the sand. It had probably been separated from its herd. Seeing the fear of death in the eyes of this speechless animal, Zaid's heart melted. Zaid looked toward the sky and said while crying, "Oh Allah, I ate the first date to satisfy my hunger. I gave the second to your servant, and I dedicate this third to this speechless creature. Now my life is in your hands." He crushed that last date and put it into the mouth of the young deer. After a short while, the deer gathered strength, stood up, and ran away in one direction. Now Zaid had nothing to eat and nothing to drink. He collapsed on the sand and closed his eyes. He was certain that his death was near. But in that very moment, he heard a faint sound of flowing water in his ears. He thought it was his illusion or a mirage, but the sound was real. As soon as he opened his tired eyes, he saw that the place where he had fed the young deer, the sand was becoming wet. He began to dig the sand with his nails, and from beneath, a spring of cool and sweet water started to flow in the middle of the thirsty desert. Where did this spring come from? Was it the return of that 1 date given by Zaid? And would he now be able to reach his caravan and his home again?
The spring that emerged on the burning sand of the desert was not an ordinary event. It was a gift from Allah for the servant who had given even his last hope in life for the sake of Allah's creation. Zaid drank water to his fill,
washed his face, and fell into prostration. Tears were flowing from his eyes, and he kept saying, "Oh Allah, you are truly the most merciful. I took too long to recognize you." He had just risen from prostration when he saw dust rising in the distance. It was his own caravan that had reached there while searching for him. When his companions saw him sitting beside a spring of sweet water in a thirsty desert, they were astonished. In a place where there had been no sign of water for centuries, today life was flowing. Zaid's accountant asked in amazement, "Son Zaid, how did all this happen?" Zaid smiled, pointed toward the empty pouch beside him, and said, "Accountant, this is all the miracle of those 3 dates which removed arrogance from my heart and filled it with the love of Allah."
When Zaid returned to his city, he was no longer the proud merchant he used to be. He dedicated half of his wealth to the poor and the needy. He opened the doors of his palace to everyone in need. The people of the city were amazed that the man who once would not even respond properly to anyone had now become compassionate toward all. Zaid often gave this advice to his children and friends. Never think that your wealth is the result of your own effort. It is a trust from Allah. And remember, when you give your best for the sake of Allah to someone else, Allah provides for you from places you cannot even imagine.
Friends, the story of the wandering merchant in the desert and the miracle of 3 dates teaches us that sacrifice in difficult times and sharing the pain of others is something Allah values deeply. Today, whatever we have, do we take out a share for others? Share your opinion in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, do not forget to share it with your loved ones.